This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have John Rood on the show. He is the founder of Proceptual, which is an AI governance consulting and training company. He's also a part-time adjunct professor at Michigan State and University of Chicago, where he teaches AI governance. So we're going to talk a lot about that as well today. And anyway, with all that being said, John, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, I'm happy to be here.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got into AI and why is it that you founded Proceptual, and let's just use that for some context.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been trucking on Perceptual since the end of 2022. And I started that because and that was kind of like the beginning of this like current age of generative AI, like like ChatGPT had just come out in like October, I think, that year. And so like a million other people, like a million other entrepreneurs, like I looked at, I was like, well, this is like what the future's going to be. So I want to be working in that space. And then I kind of just always naturally had a proclivity to like policy work, like legal issues, compliance, like that kind of thing. That's just how my mind works. So, I was thinking like, okay, there's all these new regulations around the world of AI. That's interesting to me. Companies are going to need help. So that's how I kind of got into the industry. And initially, we'd started doing pretty narrow set of compliance and audit work for a law that came into the books in New York City. One of the first AI regulations, and that started to get us like our first like significant customers, and then we went from there.
Nice. And, with AI, it seems to be moving so fast that regulation's kind of having a difficult time keeping up with it. What have you found that people have like started doing and then a regulation comes in kind of afterwards and have to like shift courses and things like that?
Yeah, it's really tough, and it's getting a little bit clearer, I think, than where it might have been a few years ago. So
Mhm.
when we first got into this, like in 2023, 2024, it felt like basically every state was going to have their own AI regulations, and then like some like city, like New York City has, as I just referenced, has their own AI regulation. City of Chicago has some AI stuff. So it seemed like that was going to be like a really challenging environment. What we've seen over the last like roughly 18 months, however, is there's been a lot of consolidation in the policymaking and legal realm, just around this idea of like a robust system of AI governance. And we're going to talk, I'm sure, today a lot about what that actually means. But fundamentally, EU has their EU AI Act. That's going to be kind of one of the key global regulations. And then we started to see some like knockoff regulations from that, like state of Colorado has a regulation that basically mandates that AI companies will have like governance structures. And then we started to see like, California has kind of a version of that. So we're seeing a little bit of consolidation where now it's like, it's not easy to do AI compliance work, but it's much more clear now what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, well, that's good. Because it is one of those things that's kind of it's new for a lot of us, especially in tech. We're just trying to keep current with what's been going on in our realm as far as like what new tools are out there and how we can use them, and then you also have to play with like what is the right things and ethical things to do with them. And what advice would you have to tech leaders that are out there today? Using tools like Perplexity or ChatGPT or Gemini 3 to kind of build some of their environments to make sure that they are always compliant.
It's a really big question. And a lot of it goes back to this idea of risk management. And you and a lot of your audience who have worked in like cybersecurity and privacy and like done like SOC 2, et cetera, like will be really familiar with that concept. So every different organization has their own level of risk tolerance. And if you are like a publicly traded healthcare company, you have a ton of risk, you're in a highly regulated industry, you're going to need a pretty robust system of protections. It's probably going to require either like a team, like several people, or a pretty robust consulting engagement with the kind of company that we are. On the flip side, like if you are like you work for a 50-person accounting firm running their IT, and they just, use, like you said, Chat GPT and Perplexity. For that sort of organization, maybe all you need is kind of like an internal AI use policy, which we're seeing a lot of those now, finally. And then there's a lot of space in between there. So it really depends on the industry, the complexity of the organization, and the organization size.
So let's talk a little bit about those internal AI use policies, because that's one of the things that companies are, a lot of them are rolling out different policies. But one of the challenges that they have is actually enforcing those policies. Have you ran into roadblocks with that, or any hiccups with how to enforce a policy that's been put in place?
Yeah, totally. So, I always I collect all these phrases and like new terminology that I like wish I would have invented. And shadow AI is like the perfect one for our
Hmm.
age. So probably most of your audience will be familiar, but shadow AI is basically people in an organization or a company using AI in a way that is either just like ignores the use policy or is in violation of the use policy. And so, for us in AI governance, a lot of work is figuring out like how do we kind of surface that shadow AI. And the story that I hear over and over, three-quarters of our clients have exactly this problem. And the problem is the CEO says, okay, we've got to like do AI. That's how we always hear about it.
Yeah.
You got to do AI,
CFM
right?
AI. Yeah.
And so then we say, okay, so what does do AI mean? And what that turns out in a lot of organizations, and some surprisingly large organizations, is that we're just going to buy like the pro license version of either ChatGPT Enterprise, or even more likely, we're going to get Microsoft Copilot, Pro version. And there's nothing wrong with either of those systems. And then what happens is the privacy and governance people, like people just like me, come in and lock the system down so tight that it works like clearly and obviously much worse than just like free or $20 a month off the shelf chat GPT. So
Mhm.
that's where we see shadow AI. Like we don't see shadow AI so much where like people have just like decided to violate the policy. We see shadow AI because people are actually trying to use AI for like a job to be done, but they're finding that the official version that's approved by the company just doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what are the tools out there, or are there any that can kind of help detect and enforce some of these things? Because what I've seen is someone will create a policy and they'll purchase Copilot for everybody and say Copilot's the tool we're using. We're only using Copilot, and then you have a little conversation. And someone's like, "Oh yeah, I was putting it in Gemini and I was getting this answer, and then when I put it in ChatGPT, I would get this answer." Like, well, those aren't approved.
Uh-oh. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. There's a bunch of startups that are in that space, and then a bunch of like more established players. And that's the thing where like if you Google it, you're going to find 100 of them.
Mhm.
There's lots of like browser extensions that do that. Like lots of ways that you could kind of like block that from an IP perspective, or from from an IP perspective. But yeah, I mean, it's a real problem. It does require consistent monitoring. Um, the other part of it is like, yes, you can do monitoring on your company devices, but what we see all the time is people are just using like ChatGPT on their mobile phones
Right.
to get work done. And that's a real challenge too. And that's much more of a, I would say, change management or policy question than it is like a technology question.
Yeah, because it's so easy where, I can just use ChatGPT on my phone and take a picture and upload it, and maybe I'm taking a picture of a contract that a vendor just sent me, and
Exactly.
and it, where does that fall in the line? Because I'm not using a company device, but I am using company data.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the challenges I think we're running into now. And like you said, if we just use, for every use case, there's something different, right? Because like maybe for a development, they want to use Claude, or they want to use something that's more geared to the tools that they're using and not using Copilot. You know, so how do you make sure that the tools that you have are the right tools for everyone and that they're doing things properly?
So I think that you kind of solve that problem by having, first of all, better policies initially, and then
Mhm.
secondly, you have really clear policy or procedures in place to update those policies. So sometimes I will see folks put together like an internal AI use policy, and like you've seen this 1,000 times probably. Like someone puts together a nice policy, they hire a consultant, like the lawyer looks at it, and then like it goes into like someone's drawer and just like to never be seen
Yep.
again. And oftentimes that happens to coincide with either vendor review or audit preparation, and that's totally understandable, right? So I get why that happens, but the way that this works well is when we put the policy in place, and then we commit to managing AI not as a single point in time, but as a management system where we know, for example, that we're going to have lots of requests over the next like infinity years basically for new AI systems in the organization. So we have to have a policy where we can get approvals or disapprovals of that quickly, right? So
Mm.
if your AI policy either doesn't have a way to get new algorithms and new platforms approved, it'll fail. Or if your AI policy is so locked down that you're like, we're gonna only do approvals at like the AI Jamboree once a year or something, like that's not going to work. Like people will circumvent that. It's got to be like 2 week approvals on new AI systems.
Yeah. No, I think that's one of the problems is people will put together these policies and they're like, we'll review these annually. And, that's just too slow.
Yeah, exactly. And all of this is just it's funny because we talk about AI as the technology, but the problems that you and I are discussing now are fundamentally people problems. Like these are
Yes.
organizational design problems. These are change management problems. And fortunately, we've got a lot of other models that we can look at and learn from. It's not AI governance did not invent governance, so to speak. And so we know things like there's got to be someone in the organization who's responsible on a rolling basis to do like relatively simple approvals, right? So when the marketing team comes back and says, "Hey, we need Microsoft Copilot to be locked down 1% less because we want to be able to do this specific thing," someone has to be able to give them that authorization if it's like obviously okay, without having it to get like kicked up to the CTO or the CEO every single time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, um, one of the, I think having those kind of like guidelines of what is acceptable and in the spirit of things, not necessarily the letter of the law, like for example, if you have like a little ad and, you want to use AI to do a voiceover of something you're going to put on Instagram, and you want to make sure it's nobody's real voice. But then someone says, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could use like Steven Seagal's voice for this or something like that?" And then you run into problems. But so how do you define kind of those high level um, things that are acceptable and things that might be a little too risky?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of it comes back to the discussion that we'd already had about risk tolerance.
Hmm.
So, like large organizations that are like big enough to get sued have a different risk profile than startups who can. I don't want to say get away with more, but who are able to accept a little bit more risk. And so I think that starts at the top. Like that starts with the senior management or the owner or the CEO who has to work with the AI governance team to set that risk tolerance policy. And then from there, I think you could start to make decisions that kind of flow out from that. There's definitely templates. I mean, we when we do this work for clients, like we start with a template, right? And we say like, here's kind of what the typical organization of your size, complexity, and industry might do. And so, for a large organization in that example, like we're going to lock that down pretty tight, that we have to have pretty good controls around use of things that might be anyone else's IP. Um, and again, like if we're a startup, like we probably have a slightly different stance on that.
So what is the risk of putting your IP into a tool like ChatGPT or Gemini, and other people being able to take that and then generate things using that?
This is yes, thank you. That is like a major softball question for me because this is like that's exactly what we deal with all the time. There's a couple like major risk factors, and by the way, like it's a great question because this really is where like the majority of AI risk comes in like an average organization, which is like not OpenAI, not Google, whatever. It's not like an AI startup. Like your average company with just like regular people like making widgets or whatever. This is where risk comes in, and it happens a couple ways. Number one is information gets uploaded, which is either personal identifiable or some other way protected. So one of the one of our first clients, we got this call like 2.5 years ago. It was like a home healthcare organization, and they had a nurse. The nurse goes into, their client's home, treats the patient, and then like makes notes, right? And this nurse had been with him for a long time. English was not her first language, so like her notes were like really brief, kind of like lots of typos, broken English, etc. No problem. But then one day, her notes start to become this like flowery, like British, like Victorian pose, and you're like, oh, that's obviously ChatGPT, and like everyone knows it's ChatGPT writing these notes. And that's like a liability disaster, right? So when we upload person identifiable information, and that's obvious to you and to me, and probably obvious to your listeners, but might not necessarily be obvious to our frontline workforce. And that's the place where, yeah, we have to have the policy, but then we also have to have the training, which I'm sure we'll talk about that later too. So PII is a big vector for that. On the IP side, there's lots of different ways that I don't even want to say hackers, but like clever users of AI systems have to try to back out information by prompting, right? So things like prompt injection, trying to reverse engineer prompts to get like the information that was used to train the system. And so we always have to be on the lookout for that stuff as well. And like a lot of times, like the risk doesn't pan out, but I've definitely had clients have called and said, hey, my intern just uploaded our entire customer database to ChatGPT. Is that a problem? And the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and so right now, I know like with, cyber attacks and things like that, if you get breached, you have to notify your customers that you got breached, especially if you want to stay in compliance with like, PCI or something like that. What do you have to do when something like that happens because of your own fault with, personal customer data?
Yeah, it's a great question. What we always like to see is that we've got to have an incident reporting mechanism with every AI governance policy and system that we would set up. And I find this oftentimes gets left out because, and I think the reason that it gets left out is because we've got in an average organization, the AI governance is like all the top people, right? Like the CEO is there and the CTO is there, and we're all talking and putting together the right strategy. And oftentimes, the way that this actually plays out, like 10 rungs down the org chart, tends to get forgotten. What we have to do 10 rungs down the org chart is two things fundamentally. Number one is training, which we already mentioned. And the second is incident response, which is, hey, I think that either I screwed something up or someone else screwed something up. What do I do? And this is well known in cybersecurity, right? So as you'd referenced, this is not brand new, but we've got to make sure that we have done that training like far down the org chart so people know what kind of things that they should be reporting, because that's not immediately obvious.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really good. So let's talk a little bit about training. When it comes to training, uh, how deep should it go, and who all should be trained within an organization?
So my opinion is that basically anyone who's using a computer at work needs to get this kind of training. And that's like, it's sort of like a silly thing to say because like everyone uses a computer at work fundamentally. Like even if you work on a factory floor, right? You probably are carrying an iPad with you, working on your ERP or whatever you use.
Right.
And I do think that the levels have to be really different. And, fortunately, it's not just my opinion. A lot of the frameworks that we help organizations put into place that are going to be like extremely popular in the next few years, like ISO 42001, for example, is really clear that you've got to have appropriate levels of training for the different kind of levels of folk that are touching AI, right? So the expertise and training that you need your CTO to have is obviously going to be very different from your frontline, your nurses and your med techs or whatever in my previous example. So when we work with an organization on training, it's not just like one training, right? Like sometimes you get like the sexual harassment training, for example, and it's just the same
Yeah.
for everyone. Everyone just kind of clicks through it as fast as possible. What we're trying to do instead is say there's some people who are fundamentally buying or building AI, and they need to know a lot about how to manage those systems. There's some people who are governing AI, right? CEOs, CTOs, CIOs, chief privacy officers, board members. They need to know a lot. And then there's further down the org chart, we've got our frontline workforce, kind of up to micromanagers and directors, and they fundamentally need training on what can go wrong with AI and then what happens if it does, right? So again, like the dangers of AI and what our AI policy is and our incident reporting strategies.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I know, like, I'm starting to see it even in like security insurance that they're talking like, do you have AI training? And right now it's very vague of what they require, but I imagine that's going to get more precise based off the job roles.
Yeah, I mean, I sure hope so. Like that's what we do all day. So I hope that that's the case. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And we see, it's funny. We see kind of both sides because sometimes we'll go into an organization and they'll say, well, we don't need any, security or responsibility training. We just need to know how to like use the AI systems. Like they want the productivity side, which makes perfect sense. And so we're happy to train on the productivity side as well. But then ultimately you're just not going to get very far in the AI world without the responsibility and safety and ethics side as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, So one of the things that I've noticed is like AI is baked into everything, and there's different levels of what is, things that need to be governed and what shouldn't. Like for example, if you are editing images and video with Adobe products, it's all baked in there. Now there's contextual AI that you can just type in, hey, change the way this person's standing, and you know make changes that way. But it's also baked into like your browser. If you're using Chrome, if you're using Edge, you have Copilot right there. And sometimes it's very difficult to manage what is allowed and what isn't allowed within these products because it's already baked in. Have you seen any kind of shift or push towards the vendor side from governance to kind of adjust some of that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's a hard issue. One of
Mhm.
the first things that we do when we're putting an AI management system in place is that we have to get an inventory of all the use of AI within the organization. And it's easy to start off and say like, well, we make what we have like three products that we make, but then there's like 100 things to exactly your point that come in from various vendors, and then it's about it's kind of like like to be honest, it's like a time management function where we have to say, we've got all this stuff. We've got 100 AI algorithms that we're using. We've got to bucket them by risk, and then figure out what to do with them. Right. So there's a set of AI algorithms that, or kind of like AI use cases would be a better way to say it, that are in my mind relatively high risk, and they're high risk for one of two reasons. Either they have a potentially harmful impact on like actual human people, or they are potential legal or compliance liability issues. The biggest one by far, and the one that's like every organization has to deal with it, is HR tools, right? HR tools, first of all, every single one of them is either actually driven by AI or they claim that it's, that it's driven by AI, like one or the other. And there's probably some gray in there as well. And every one of them has a massive impact on the actual life prospects of actual people and is significantly highly regulated at basically every level of government, right? And anytime there's a new AI regulation, like Colorado, California, even places like Texas, Illinois, for example, all have like very specific regulations around the use of AI and discrimination. And so that's not new, right? It's not new that we have to prevent discrimination in hiring. Like that's been the case since the 1970s. But now we have this like additional technology where we have to make sure that we're auditing those systems, that we've got human oversight, that we've got transparency to our job applicants, and that's a real challenge. And again, like to your point, like that's only the HR stuff, and there's a lot more in the organization too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There sure is. What should we be doing to generate that inventory of all the systems out there? Because you know as well as I do with shadow IT, shadow AI, there's a lot of things out there, and we have to have, like you said, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So how do you have all that inventory put in place, and how do you go about building that list and making sure it's maintained?
So I think there's definitely some technology out there where, you can look at like your IP logs or something like that. But
Mhm.
I think that the reality is, you just have to go and ask people in the organization. And we do a lot of training of people who are kind of transitioning from something else to the AI governance. Like they're going to run AI governance for their organization. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is as I'd mentioned, like AI governance is less a technology function, it's more of a people function and a change management function. So the AI governance professional has to kind of be building those relationships such that you're able to go to the marketing department and say, hey, I really need a list of all the tools that you use and the use cases that that you use them for in order to kind of build that out. And you have to start building the institutional policies and also kind of like the soft power in the organization, like the relational power that the marketing folks know to report new AI systems to you. So that's a very imperfect system. Most organizations are not going to capture all of it. And again, a lot of that is because like AI is so widespread that like every day, like just on my iPhone, just like, I'm waiting for my kids to get ready for school or I've got 10 extra minutes and I'll see some new thing on Twitter, like some new AI program. I'm like, I'm gonna go play with that for 10 minutes. And like that's not gonna get reported, like basically no matter how good your systems are. Getting to where you're getting like 90% of what's happening in your organization is a very achievable short-term goal.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think a big part of what you're saying is, you have to build that relationship and have that relationship with your, department heads and users of of the softwares early on. What advice do you have for tech leaders that are maybe new to a role or they're advancing in their career? Now they have that responsibility to build those relationships. How do they go about doing that and building that trust with those people?
Well, I think that a lot of it is making sure that you really understand the use case of the different parts of the organization. And it's funny, I just posted on LinkedIn today, and I was posting about how this everyone's excited about AI governance, and you get a lot of people that are coming from like a law or policy or even like philosophy type background, as opposed to a technology background. And
Mhm.
sometimes those people go to an organization and will say like, okay, like my number one job here is to lock everything down and avoid like the Terminator and Skynet and stuff like that. And those people don't really get very far, right? Because they're seen as Dr. No. And
Right.
what you're trying to avoid in the world, if you're an AI governance professional, is being seen as Dr. No. What you want to do instead is you want to make sure that you really understand what each of the departments is trying to accomplish, understand their use cases, and figure out ways, like collaboratively, like as a business partner, that you can either update the policy or modify what kind of AI is in use in order to meet those goals. And there's always a way, and we see this all the time. I think that there's this like tale as old as time, age old conflict between the IT folks and the sales folks that want to move fast and the privacy and security folks that want to move slow. And I'm not going to say that's like totally a myth, but the better relationships are across those lines in the organization, generally the happier everyone is.
Yeah, absolutely. And one question that I have for you when it comes to training, if you're new to this, like let's say your organization, people are using AI, you haven't really put together a policy, you don't have any formal training. How do you go about starting the program, and what kind of advice would you have if you were called in and it said, "Hey, John, I need help here. Our company needs help. How can you guys come help us?" What kind of framework or starting point would you have for them?
So the way that we think about it is we have to start by thinking, what are the goals of the AI governance program, and are those goals appropriate for the size and context of the organization? And again, like I've said it 3 times, it's so important. It all
Mhm.
comes back to risk management. So if we are a relatively sophisticated and large organization, our ultimate goal should probably be implementation of a well-known AI governance framework, either ISO 42001 or the NIST AI risk management framework. So we don't have to do it from scratch, right? Like I'm not just like coming up with this stuff. Like we have well-established frameworks, just like in security that we do with SOC 2 or ISO 27001. And we're going to put one of those into the organization. Um, that's a big project, right? Like that's a project that's going to take like many months and not weeks and not days, certainly. On the other side, sometimes we'll get it. We actually signed a client a couple weeks ago who said, hey, we need to be ISO 42001 certified in the next 18 months. But by the end of the year, we need, a policy that we can put in place where at least we can show it to our customers, that
Mhm.
to show that we're making progress, right? So if that's the case, if we're saying we need kind of a common sense internal use policy with some external facing limitations around things like really like high risk areas like data provenance, for example. There we can put together a pretty usable policy, in a month or so.
Okay, cool. Um, so what kind of advice would you have, like, for people that are listening to this that are just like scared right now because they feel like they're already way behind and they got to get started with something, but they don't know where to start.
Yeah, totally. Um, So, like, a couple of ideas. Like, number one, I'm gonna shill the class that I'm launching in partnership with Michigan State University. It's a certification for AI governance professionals. We're gonna start taking enrollments for that in mid-January of 26. So just a
Mhm.
couple weeks from today. Uh, that I think is the only certification course offered by a major university on the topic. So I'm excited to do it. The other thing that people can do is just get on LinkedIn and start making those relationships with other people in this space. One of the things that I love about AI governance is that the community is, I think, still relatively small. So a lot of tools get shared. And if you just go Google like AI, AI governance templates, you'll find a bunch of stuff. Will it be like the best? Will it be customized for your organization? Like, no, that's kind of going to be your job. But that's a good place to start. Also, I think that I'll hopefully you'll be able to put a link to our newsletter in the show notes, which has got like everything that you need to know on a weekly basis about AI governance.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. And if people are interested, how can they connect with you online, LinkedIn website or whatever, and ask questions and learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone is more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to. I mean, I accept everybody. I love to get messages. So feel free to reach out, and we'll put that in the show notes, I'm sure. Subscribe to our newsletter if you want to talk to us more about that. Jump on our website, proceptual.com. You'll see the link there. And we'd love to connect with people, even if they don't end up being clients. It's like I said, this is a small world, and we love to make friends.
Awesome. And I'll put that in the show notes too at geekleader.com so people can go there and click through. John, thanks so much for coming on the show and teaching us a little bit about AI governance and the training and the things that we need to do as leaders. I appreciate it.
Hey, John, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.